The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., cutting through the silence of Calder Roan's garage apartment. He wiped grease from his hands with a rag before answering, already knowing the call would bring trouble. Calder. Rianne's voice came through breathless and strained. The baby's coming. I need someone to watch Micah. Calder stared at the wrench in his other hand. 6 months since Jace died in that car wreck. 6 months since he'd spoken more than a few words to his sister-in-law. Something about her story never sat right with him, but tonight wasn't about his suspicions. Where are you? He asked. Memorial Hospital. The contractions are getting closer. She paused. Please, Calder. I don't have anyone else. That stung because it was true. Jace had been her whole world, or so she claimed. Calder set down the wrench and grabbed his jacket. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Rianne's house took him through the center of Pine Hollow, past the diner where he and Jace used to eat breakfast every Sunday morning, past the bar where they'd celebrated Micah's birth 7 years ago, past the intersection where his brother's car had rolled 3 times before coming to rest against an oak tree. Brake failure, the report said. But Calder had serviced that car himself just a week before the accident. The brakes were perfect. Rianne's house sat dark except for a single porch light. Calder used the spare key she'd given him months ago, back when she still pretended to care about family. Uncle Calder. Micah's voice came from the top of the stairs, small and uncertain. Hey, buddy. Calder looked up at the boy silhouetted against the hallway light. Mom had to go to the hospital. The baby's coming tonight. Micah didn't move from the top step. Is she going to be okay? Your mom's tough. She'll be fine. Calder climbed the stairs slowly. How about we get you back to bed? The boy's room was neat to the point of being sterile. No toys on the floor. No clothes draped over chairs. Everything in its place. Calder remembered his own childhood room, cluttered with model cars and baseball cards. This felt more like a museum than a 7-year-old's space. I'm not tired, Micah said, but he climbed into bed anyway. Calder sat on the edge of the mattress. Nervous about having a little sister? I guess. Micah pulled the covers up to his chin. Mom says I have to be good, that she can't handle any trouble right now. Something cold settled in Calder's stomach. What kind of trouble? You know, making noise, asking questions, being bad. Micah's eyes darted away. She says if I'm bad, maybe I should go live somewhere else. Calder kept his voice steady. You're not bad, Micah. You're a good kid. That's what Dad used to say. The boy's voice was barely a whisper. Before he went away. Before he went away. Like Jace had chosen to die. Calder wanted to correct him, to explain that sometimes bad things just happened. But looking at Micah's too serious face, he wondered if the boy understood more than any 7-year-old should. Get some sleep, Calder said. I'll be downstairs if you need anything. He spent the next few hours on the couch, listening to the house settle around him. Everything looked normal. Clean. Organized. But normal families didn't have kids who asked permission to breathe at T4:30 a.m. His phone buzzed with a text from Rianne. Baby girl born healthy. Coming home tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for staying. Calder stared at the message. No mention of what they'd named the baby. No excitement about becoming a mother again. Just facts delivered like a weather report. He dozed fitfully until sunrise, then made coffee and waited for Micah to wake up. Scene 2. The bathroom. Truth. Micah appeared in the kitchen at 7 o'clock sharp, dressed and ready for the day. He moved like a small soldier reporting for duty. Morning, Calder said. Hungry. I can make my own breakfast. Micah opened a cabinet and pulled out a box of cereal. Mom says I'm old enough to take care of myself. Calder watched the boy measure out exactly half a cup of cereal, then add just enough milk to cover it. No waste. No mess. No second helpings. You know, Calder said carefully, when your dad was your age, he ate everything in sight. Your grandma used to say he had a hollow leg. Micah smiled for the first time since Calder had arrived. Dad told me that story. About the time he ate a whole pie at the county fair. Won that pie-eating contest 3 years running. Calder sat across from the boy. What else did he tell you about when he was little? They talked through breakfast, Micah's voice growing more animated as he shared memories of his father. For a few minutes, he looked like any other 7-year-old. Then he glanced at the clock and his shoulders tensed. I should take a bath, he said quickly. Mom likes me clean. Good idea. You want me to start the water? Micah hesitated at the bathroom door. His hand gripped the frame so tight his knuckles went white. "Uncle." His voice was barely audible. "You won't hit me?" The question hit Calder like a physical blow. "What? If I do something wrong?" "In the bath. You won't hit me." Calder knelt down to meet the boy's eyes. "Micah, I would never hit you. Not ever. I promise." The relief on Micah's face was heartbreaking. "Okay. Mom just gets mad sometimes when I splash or take too long." Calder helped run the bath, keeping the water warm but not too hot. Micah stood by the tub, still fully dressed, waiting. "Need help with your shirt?" Calder asked. Micah shook his head quickly. "I can do it." Can you turn around?" Calder faced the door, listening to the rustle of clothes behind him. When Micah said it was okay to turn back, the boy was already in the tub, sitting with his knees drawn up to his chest. But not before Calder saw his back. Scars crisscrossed the pale skin like a roadmap of pain. Some were old and white, others still pink and healing. A few looked fresh, maybe days old. Thin lines that could only come from a belt. Darker marks that spoke of harder impacts that Calder's hands clenched into fists. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to keep his face neutral. Micah was watching him with frightened eyes, waiting for a reaction. "Water feel good?" Calder asked, his voice surprisingly steady. Micah nodded. "It's not too hot." "That's good." Calder pulled out his phone under the pretense of checking messages. "I'm just going to step out for a second, let you wash up in private." In the hallway, Calder leaned against the wall and tried not to punch a hole through it. He pulled up his camera and switched to silent mode, then returned to the bathroom. "How we doing?" he asked. Micah was washing his arms carefully, methodically. "Almost done. Take your time." Calder positioned himself where he could see the boy's back reflected in the mirror. He snapped several photos, making sure to capture the extent of the scarring. Evidence. Documentation. Proof of what someone had done to this child. When Micah stood to reach for a towel, Calder saw more marks on his ribs. Bruises in various stages of healing. A pattern that spoke of systematic, ongoing abuse. "Here you go, buddy." Calder handed him the towel, careful not to let his rage show. "Why don't you get dressed? I'll make us some lunch." Alone in the kitchen, Calder scrolled through the photos on his phone. Each image made his jaw clench tighter. This wasn't discipline. This was torture, and he was damn sure he knew who was responsible. His brother Jace had been many things: stubborn, hot-tempered, protective to a fault. But he never would have raised a hand to his son, which meant someone else had been doing this. Someone who was still in Micah's life. Someone who was about to face consequences. Rianne returned the next afternoon with a baby carrier and a smile that never reached her eyes. She looked tired but not exhausted, composed in a way that seemed rehearsed. "How was he?" she asked, setting the carrier on the coffee table without looking at Micah. "Perfect," Calder said. "Quiet as always." "Good." She turned to her son. "Micah, say hello to your sister." The boy approached the carrier like he was walking toward a trap. "She's really small." "Babies are small," Rianne said with forced patience. "That's why we have to be extra careful around them. Extra quiet. Extra good." Micah nodded solemnly. "I'll be good, Mom. I know you will." But her voice carried a warning. Calder watched this exchange with growing unease. There was no warmth between mother and son, no joy at expanding their family. Just careful distance and unspoken threats. "What's her name?" he asked. "Emma." Rianne lifted the baby from a carrier with practiced efficiency. "Emma Rose. Pretty name. Jace would have liked it." Something flickered across Rianne's face. Yes, he would have. Calder stayed for dinner, observing the family dynamic with the eye of someone trained to spot dangers. In the Army, he'd learned to read people quickly, to identify threats before they became problems. The skills served him well in civilian life, especially when dealing with customers who tried to scam him at the garage. But this was different. This was family, or what was left of it. Rian moved through the house like she was performing a role. Perfect mother, grieving widow, woman handling everything with grace under pressure. But Calder caught the way she looked at Micah when she thought no one was watching. The flash of irritation when the baby cried. The tension that never quite left her shoulders. "I should head out," he said after helping with dishes. "Let you get settled. Thanks for staying with him." Rian walked him to the door. I know this isn't easy for you either. Family's family, Calder said. If you need anything, we'll be fine. She was already closing the door. We always are. Calder sat in his truck for a few minutes, looking back at the house. Light glowed from the kitchen window, where Rhiannon was cleaning up. Micah's bedroom was dark, probably sent to bed early to keep him out of the way. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he wanted. Dr. Patricia Wells had been Jace's family doctor, someone who might remember details about Micah's medical history. Dr. Wells? This is Calder Roan, Jace's brother. Calder, I'm so sorry for your loss. How are you holding up? Getting by. Listen, I have some concerns about Micah. I was wondering if you could tell me. Has he been in to see you recently? A pause. You know, I can't discuss a patient's records without parental consent. I understand. But if there was something you thought I should know, as his uncle, another pause, longer this time. Calder, if you have concerns about a child's welfare, there are proper channels. People who are trained to handle these situations. The careful phrasing told him everything he needed to know. Dr. Wells had seen something too. Maybe she'd filed reports that went nowhere. Maybe she'd been told to mind her own business. Thank you, he said. I'll keep that in mind. He was about to drive away when he saw headlights turn into Rhiannon's driveway. A black pickup truck parked behind her car. Calder watched a man get out tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the swagger of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Cullen Pryor. Calder recognized him from around town. Construction worker, bar regular, the kind of guy who solved problems with his fists first and asked questions later. What was he doing at Rhiannon's house at 9 o'clock at night? The front door opened before Cullen reached it. Rhiannon appeared in silhouette, gesturing him inside quickly. The door closed behind them, cutting off the light. Calder started his engine and drove home slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. Rhiannon's constant phone calls, her nervous energy around the baby, the way she dismissed him so quickly tonight, and Micah's comment from the night before echoed in his memory. The man who sleeps over and makes mommy scream. Back at his apartment, Calder spread the photos from Micah's bath across his kitchen table. The evidence of systematic abuse stared back at him. Fresh marks alongside old scars. A pattern of violence that had been going on for months, maybe longer. Someone had been hurting that boy. Someone was still hurting him. And Calder was damn sure he knew who that he pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Dates. Observations. Questions that needed answers. If he was going to expose Rhiannon, he had to do it right. One chance to get justice for Micah and maybe for Jace too. Because the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that his brother's death wasn't an accident. The timing was too convenient. Jace discovers his wife is abusing their son, threatens to take the boy away, and suddenly his brakes fail on a road he'd driven 1,000 times. Calder had always been good at putting pieces together. In the Army, it had kept his squad alive. Now it might be the only thing standing between a 7-year-old boy and more nights of terror. He worked until dawn, building a timeline and planning his next moves. When he finally went to bed, one thought followed him into sleep. This was just the beginning point. 3 days later, Calder parked outside Pine Hollow Elementary during lunch hour. He'd called ahead, telling the secretary he needed to discuss Micah's adjustment to having a new sibling. A believable excuse that got him through the door. Cassidy Wilde met him in the nurse's office, a compact woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much. She closed the door carefully before speaking. "You're here about Micah," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am. I've noticed some things that concern me." Cassidy studied his face for a long moment. "Sit down, Mr. Roan. We need to talk." She pulled out a thick file folder and set it on her desk. "I've been documenting injuries for 8 months. Bruises that don't match playground accidents. Burns that look deliberate. Behavioral changes that scream abuse." Calder felt his pulse quicken. "You filed reports?" 3 of them. Her voice was bitter. "Submitted them to Child Protective Services through proper channels. But somehow the paperwork keeps getting lost. Misplaced. Transferred to investigators who never follow up." "What do you mean lost?" "I mean someone doesn't want these reports to be seen." Cassidy opened the folder, revealing photographs and detailed notes. "Look at this progression. The injuries are getting worse, more frequent. That child is living in hell, and the system is failing him. Calder studied the photos, his stomach turning. They matched what he'd seen in Rianne's bathroom, but these showed the progression over time. A roadmap of escalating violence. Why, he asked. Why would reports disappear? Because Rianne Gallows has friends. Her uncle is Sheriff Deputy Tom Gallows. Her cousin works in the county attorney's office. Small towns protect their own, even when their own are monsters. The pieces clicked together. Rianne's confidence. Her certainty that she could handle anything. She wasn't just covering up abuse, she had help. What about the school administration? Calder asked. Principal Myers says we need concrete evidence before making accusations. Apparently, documented injuries aren't concrete enough. Cassidy closed the folder. I keep trying because that boy deserves someone in his corner. But I'm running out of options. Calder pulled out his phone and showed her the photos from Micah's bath. Cassidy's face went pale. When were these taken? 3 days ago. I was babysitting while Rianne was in the hospital. Dear God. Cassidy's hands shook as she studied the images. This is the worst I've seen. Those marks on his back. Some of them are infected. Will you testify? If I can build a case, will you go on record? Cassidy didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Calder left the school with copies of Cassidy's documentation and a renewed sense of purpose. His next stop was Murphy's Bar, where he found Ronan Kerr nursing a beer and staring at the television like it held answers to life's problems. Ronan had been Jace's best friend since high school. If anyone knew what had been happening in his brother's marriage, it would be him. Are you around? Calder asked, sliding onto the adjacent bar stool. Ronan looked up with bloodshot eyes. Calder, haven't seen you around much. Staying busy at the garage. Calder ordered 2 beers. How you holding up? Some days better than others. Ronan took a long drink. Still can't believe he's gone. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the news cycle through stories about traffic delays and county fair planning. Normal problems for normal people. Can I ask you something? Calder said finally. About Jace and Rianne. Ronan's jaw tightened. What about them? Were they having problems? Before the accident, Ronan stared at his beer bottle, peeling the label with systematic precision. Define problems. The kind that end marriages. Yeah. Ronan's voice was barely audible. They were having those kind of problems. Calder waited, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes people needed space to find their words. He came to me about 2 weeks before he died. Ronan continued. Said he was filing for divorce. Said he'd found out things about Rianne that he couldn't live with. What kind of things? The way she treated Micah when no one was looking. Jay started paying attention, really watching. He saw bruises. Heard her screaming at the boy for stupid stuff. Caught her hitting him with a wooden spoon hard enough to leave welts. Calder's hands clenched around his beer bottle. What did he do? Started documenting everything. Taking pictures. Recording conversations. He was building a case for full custody. Ronan looked directly at Calder for the first time. He filed the papers 3 days before the accident. Filed for divorce. Filed for emergency custody. Said he had evidence of abuse that put Micah in immediate danger. Ronan's voice cracked. Then his brakes failed, and suddenly none of it mattered anymore. Calder felt the familiar cold weight settling in his stomach. Did you tell the police? I tried, but Sheriff Deputy Gallows said I was just a grieving friend looking for someone to blame. Said accidents happen, and spreading rumors about his niece wouldn't bring Jace back. Another piece of the puzzle. Tom Gallows wasn't just protecting family, he was protecting a killer. Do you know where Jace kept his documentation? Calder asked. He mentioned hiding copies somewhere safe. But I never found anything when I helped Rian clean out his stuff. Ronan finished his beer. She was real eager to get rid of his personal items. Donated most of it before the funeral. Calder bought another round and listened as Ronan shared more details about Jace's final weeks. The picture that emerged was of a man desperate to save his son, racing against time to gather evidence before something terrible happened. He'd been too late to save himself. But maybe his work could still save Micah. After leaving the bar, Calder drove to the sheriff's office and requested a copy of Jace's accident report. The desk clerk, a young woman who looked fresh out of high school, handed over the file without question. Calder sat his truck and read through the report carefully. Single vehicle accident. Driver lost control on Steep Creek Road during evening hours. Brake failure suspected, but inconclusive due to fire damage. No witnesses. Case closed, but there were details that bothered him. The location was wrong. Steep Creek Road wasn't on Jace's usual route home from work. The timestamp showed 8:47 p.m., but Jace usually left the office by 6 o'clock. What had he been doing for nearly 3 hours? Most importantly, the report mentioned brake failure, but didn't include any mechanical analysis. In a case involving potential equipment malfunction, standard procedure required a thorough inspection by a certified mechanic. Calder had serviced that car himself. He knew those brakes were perfect. Someone wanted the investigation closed quickly, before awkward questions could be asked. He drove to his garage and pulled Jace's service records. Oil change, brake inspection, and tire rotation completed 6 days before the accident. All systems functioning normally. Brakes tested at full efficiency, which meant someone had tampered with them after the service. Someone who knew enough about cars to make it look like mechanical failure. Someone who had access to the vehicle. Someone like Rianne, who parked her car in the same driveway every night. That evening, Calder returned to Rianne's house with a toolbox and a plausible excuse. He told her one of the kitchen outlets was sparking a potential fire hazard that needed immediate attention. "I really appreciate this," Rianne said, letting him in. "I can't afford an electrician right now." She looked tired and distracted, the baby crying somewhere upstairs. Micah sat at the kitchen table doing homework, his movements careful and precise. "No problem. Family helps family." Calder set down his toolbox. "This should only take a few minutes." While Rianne went upstairs to tend to the baby, Calder worked quickly. The outlet was fine, but he made a show of checking the wiring while scoping out the house layout. He noted the locations of landline phones, computer equipment, and security measures. More importantly, he memorized Jace's study, the room Rianne had turned into a storage space for baby supplies. If his brother had hidden evidence somewhere in the house, that would be the most likely location. "Uncle Calder." Micah appeared in the doorway. "Are you fixing the electricity?" "Making sure everything's safe," Calder replied. "How's school going?" "Okay." The boy glanced toward the stairs, then moved closer. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think Dad is in heaven?" The question caught Calder off guard. "I think your dad is at peace." "Why do you ask?" "Mom says he went away because I was bad. That good dads don't leave unless their kids make them." Micah's voice was barely a whisper. "But I try to be good. I really did." Calder set down his screwdriver and knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "Listen to me, Micah. Your dad didn't leave because of anything you did. He loved you more than anything in the world. Then why did he go? Sometimes bad things happen to good people, but it's never because of something a kid did. Never." Tears welled up in Micah's eyes. "Mom says if I tell lies about her, I'll go away too." Ice ran down Calder's spine. "What kind of lies?" "About getting hurt. About being bad. She says people won't believe me anyway, because moms don't hurt their kids." Micah wiped his nose on his sleeve. "But sometimes she does hurt me. When she's mad about the baby crying or Dad being gone." Calder pulled the boy into a gentle hug, feeling the tension in the small shoulders. "You're not telling lies, buddy, and you're not going anywhere. I promise." "Promise for real." "Promise for real." Rianne's footsteps on the stairs sent Micah scurrying back to his homework. She appeared with the baby in her arms, looking frazzled. "Sorry about that. She's been fussy all day." Rianne bounced the baby mechanically. "How's the outlet?" "All fixed. Just a loose connection." Calder packed up his tools. "Should be fine now." "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." But her smile looked forced, and she was already moving toward the door. Calder left with more questions than answers, but also with a plan forming in his mind. If Jace had hidden evidence in that house, Calder would find it. And if Rianne was threatening Micah to keep him quiet, she'd already made her biggest mistake. That night, he researched property records and found what he was looking for. Jace had purchased a storage unit 6 weeks before his death, paid for a full year in advance. Unit 47 at Pine Hollow Self-Storage. The next morning, Calder visited the storage facility and spoke with the manager, a chatty woman named Betty, who remembered Jace well. "Such a polite young man," she said. "Always said please and thank you. Not like some of the customers we get. I'm settling his estate, Calder explained. I need to access his unit. Oh, I'm sorry, honey, but his wife already cleaned that out. Came by about a month ago with the death certificate and everything. Took it all away in a U-Haul. Calder's heart sank. Another dead end. Another piece of evidence disappeared. But as he was leaving, Betty called after him. Wait, I almost forgot. He came by the day before his accident, real agitated about something. Said he needed to move some items to a safer location. Did he say where? No, but he asked about our climate-controlled units. Said he had some electronic equipment that needed special storage. Betty consulted her computer. We were full that day, so I gave him the number for secure storage across town. 30 minutes later, Calder was standing in Unit 12 at Secure Storage, looking at a plastic tub labeled Tax Documents 2019 to 2023. Inside, he found Jace's tablet wrapped in bubble wrap, along with a manila envelope marked Insurance. The tablet was password protected, but Calder knew his brother's habits. After 3 tries, Micah 2017 unlocked the device. What he found inside made his blood run cold. Email drafts detailed Rianne's psychological abuse of Micah. Screenshots of text messages where she threatened to get rid of the brat if Jace didn't stop interfering with her parenting. Photos of injuries that matched Cassidy's documentation. But the most damning evidence was in the GPS tracking app. Jace had been monitoring Rianne's location in the weeks before his death, building a timeline of her movements. The data showed she'd been meeting someone regularly in a motel outside town, someone who drove a black pickup truck registered to Cullen Pryor. More importantly, the GPS showed Rianne's phone at the crash site on Steep Creek Road at 8:32 p.m. on the night Jace died. 15 minutes before the police arrived. 15 minutes before anyone should have known there was an accident to report. The manila envelope contained printed copies of everything, along with a notarized statement from Jace documenting his intent to file for emergency custody. At the bottom, in his brother's careful handwriting, if something happens to me, make sure Micah is safe, or is not what she seems. Calder sat in the storage unit for a long time, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Rianne had been having an affair with Cullen Pryor. Jace had discovered the abuse and threatened to take Micah away. So they'd killed him and made it look like an accident. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd let him live long enough to gather evidence. Back at his apartment, Calder examined the tablet more carefully. Hidden in a folder marked Work Projects was something that made his pulse race a backup file from Jace's dashcam. The video was mostly darkness and headlight glare, but in the final 30 seconds before impact, Calder could make out a black SUV in the rearview mirror. The vehicle was tailgating aggressively, its headlights filling the frame. Then came the moment of impact. The dashcam caught Jace fighting with the steering wheel, pumping brakes that wouldn't respond. His voice, raw with terror. What the hell, oh God? Oh God. The SUV disappeared from view just before the crash, turning off onto a side road that would lead back toward town. A side road that connected to the highway Rianne would have taken to get home. Calder watched the video 3 times, studying every frame. The black SUV matched Rianne's vehicle exactly. The timing matched the GPS data, and the deliberate nature of the tailgating suggested this wasn't road rage, it was murder. He made multiple copies of everything, storing them in different locations. Safety deposit box, cloud storage, hidden drives at the garage. If something happened to him, the evidence would survive. But first, he needed more. Courts required overwhelming proof in cases like this, especially when the defendant had family connections in law enforcement. He needed audio recordings, witness statements, absolute certainty that would leave no room for reasonable doubt. Time to set a trap. The next evening, Calder volunteered to babysit again, while Rianne took the baby to a doctor's appointment. He arrived early with a gym bag full of electronic equipment purchased from a surveillance supply company in Denver. You're a lifesaver, Rianne said, already reaching for her keys. This appointment is across town, so I'll be gone for at least 2 hours. Take your time. Micah and I will find something to do. The moment her car left the driveway, Calder got to work. Voice-activated recorders went behind picture frames and under furniture. A baby monitor found its way into the kitchen, hidden where the base unit wouldn't be noticed. He even clipped a tiny microphone inside Micah's backpack, disguised as a broken zipper pull. "What are you doing, Uncle Calder?" Micah watched from the doorway, curious but not alarmed. "Just checking to make sure everything's working right in your house. Sometimes old houses have problems that need fixing." "Are you going to fix Mom?" The question stopped Calder cold. "What do you mean?" "She's broken too. Like the house. She gets really mad and says things that hurt worse than hitting." Micah sat on the stairs. "Dad used to fix things when they were broken, but he can't fix Mom now." Calder sat beside the boy. "What kind of things does she say?" "That I'm the reason Dad went away. That if I wasn't such a bad kid, he'd still be alive." Micah picked at a loose thread on his jeans. "She says the baby is good because she doesn't cry much. But I'm bad because I ask questions and make noise." "You're not bad, Micah. You're a normal kid who deserves to feel safe in his own house." "Will you really keep me safe? Even if Mom gets mad?" Calder put his arm around the boy's shoulders. "I promise. No matter what happens, you're going to be okay." They spent the rest of the evening playing board games and talking about Jace. Micah shared memories his father would never know. He'd made quiet moments between a boy and his dad that Rianne could never touch. When she returned, Calder was reading to Micah in the living room, the picture of a caring uncle spending time with his nephew. "How did it go?" he asked. "Fine. Just routine shots." Rianne seemed distracted, checking her phone repeatedly. "Thanks again for watching him." Calder left his hidden surveillance network in place and waited. Over the next week, the recordings captured a horrifying pattern of psychological and physical abuse that Rianne's voice, sharp with irritation. "Stop crying. Your father isn't coming back, so you need to get used to disappointment." The sound of a slap, followed by Micah's muffled sobs. "If you tell anyone about this, they'll take you away from me. But they won't want you either because you're damaged goods. So you'll end up in foster care with people who don't give a damn about you." More hitting, more threats, more psychological torture designed to break a 7-year-old spirit. But the most damning recording came on Thursday night, when Cullen Pryor visited after Micah's bedtime. Calder's hidden microphone picked up their conversation with crystal clarity. "That bastard Calder's been sniffing around," Rianne said. "He was here again yesterday, asking questions about the accident." "What kind of questions?" Cullen's voice was rough, dangerous. "Whether Jace had been acting strange before he died. If we've been having marriage problems. The kind of questions that make me nervous. You think he knows something? I think he suspects something. And if he keeps digging, he might find something we don't want found." A pause. Then Cullen, "Want to have a talk with him?" "Not yet. But if he becomes a real problem, we'll make him look like he was inappropriate with the boy. Destroy his reputation before he can destroy ours." "That's cold, even for you." "That's survival. I've worked too hard building this life to let Jace's brother ruin it." The recording continued for another 20 minutes, with Rianne detailing her plans to discredit Calder if he got too close to the truth. She talked about planting evidence in his apartment, coaching Micah to make false accusations, using her family connections to ensure any investigation went nowhere. But the most chilling moment came when she talked about Jace's final weeks. "You should have seen his face when he realized what I was capable of," she said with satisfaction. "All those years thinking he married a sweet small-town girl. He had no idea who he was really dealing with." "Still think we should have handled it differently," Cullen muttered. "How?" "Let him take Micah and expose everything. This was cleaner. An accident that no one questions. Except his brother. His brother will get the message soon enough. One way or another." Calder listened to the recording 3 times, his rage building with each repetition. Rianne wasn't just an abuser, she was a cold-blooded killer who'd murdered his brother and now threatened to destroy anyone who got in her way. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd confessed to murder on tape, in her own words, with witnesses present. No family connections could make that evidence disappear. The next morning, Calder made copies of all his recordings and drove to the state police barracks in Grand Junction. Local law enforcement couldn't be trusted, but the state police had no connections to the Gallows family. Detective Maria Santos listened to 30 minutes of audio evidence, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When the recordings finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied Calder carefully. "This is a lot of evidence, Mr. Rohn. But I have to ask, how did you obtain these recordings? I was concerned about my nephew's welfare. I documented what I observed in someone else's home, without their knowledge or consent. Calder met her gaze steadily. A child was being abused. I did what was necessary to protect him. Detective Santos nodded slowly. Let me make some calls. If what you've shown me is accurate, we're looking at multiple felonies including child abuse, interference with a government report, and potentially homicide. What about my nephew? We'll need to remove him from the home immediately. Do you have somewhere safe he can stay? Calder thought of Cassidy Wilde, the school nurse who'd been fighting for Micah all along. I know someone who can help. Good, because once we move on this, there's no going back. You understand that. I understand that a little boy has been living in hell for months, and it ends today. Detective Santos picked up her phone. Then let's end it. The emergency custody hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning in November. Calder sat in the gallery watching as Detective Santos presented the state's evidence to Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman with silver hair and no patience for procedural delays. Your Honor, Detective Santos began, we have compelling evidence that Micah Gallows is in immediate danger in his current living situation. She played selected portions of the audio recordings, each one hitting the courtroom like a physical blow. Rianne's voice filled the space, raw with cruelty as she berated and threatened her 7-year-old son. Stop crying. Your father isn't coming back, so you need to get used to disappointment. The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed through the speakers. If you tell anyone about this, they'll take you away from me. But they won't want you either because you're damaged goods. Judge Morrison's expression grew darker with each revelation. Across the aisle, Rianne sat rigidly beside her attorney, her face a mask of composure that couldn't quite hide the panic in her eyes. Defense? The judge asked when the recordings ended. Rianne's lawyer, a thin man named Davis who specialized in keeping rich people out of trouble, stood slowly. Your Honor, these recordings were obtained illegally, without my client's knowledge or consent. They should be inadmissible. Mr. Davis, Judge Morrison's voice could have frozen water. We're not conducting a criminal trial here. This is an emergency custody hearing where the only consideration is the immediate safety of a minor child. The evidence is admissible. Detective Santos continued her presentation, introducing Cassidy Wilde's medical documentation and photographic evidence of Micah's injuries. Each photo drew gasps from the gallery. The progression of abuse lay bare for everyone to see. The state requests immediate removal of the minor child from the defendant's custody. Detective Santos concluded, pending a full investigation into allegations of child abuse and related crimes. Davis tried to mount a defense, arguing that Rianne was a grieving widow struggling to cope with single parenthood. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Judge Morrison had seen enough. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds credible risk of imminent harm to the minor child. Her gavel came down with finality. Emergency custody is granted to the state, with placement to be determined by Child Protective Services within 24 hours. Rianne's composure finally cracked. You can't do this. He's my son. Mrs. Gallows, Judge Morrison's voice cut through the outburst. You will have opportunities to contest these findings through proper legal channels. But for now, the child's safety is paramount. Court officers moved to escort Rianne from the building as she screamed threats and accusations. This is all lies. Calderon is trying to steal my son. He's obsessed with destroying our family. Calder watched her meltdown with grim satisfaction. The mask was finally off, revealing the monster underneath. After the hearing, Detective Santos found him in the hallway. CPS has agreed to place Micah with Cassidy Wilde temporarily. She's been approved as an emergency foster parent. When can I see him? This afternoon. He's been staying at a safe house since we removed him yesterday. The transition should be easier with familiar faces. That evening, Calder sat in Cassidy's living room watching Micah play with a puzzle. The boy looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of secrets had been holding him upright. But there was something else in his eyes, the first glimmer of hope Calder had seen in months. Uncle Calder. Micah looked up from his puzzle. Am I really safe now? You're safe, buddy. No one's going to hurt you anymore. What about Mom? Is she in trouble? Calder chose his words carefully. Your mom made some bad choices. Now she has to face the consequences. Micah nodded solemnly. Dad always said choices have consequences. I just didn't understand what that meant. Your dad was a smart man. Will I still be able to visit his grave? I like to tell him about school and stuff. Calder's throat tightened. Of course. We'll go together whenever you want. As the days passed, more evidence emerged. Forensic accountants discovered Rianne had been stealing from Jace's life insurance policy. Phone records confirmed her relationship with Cullen Pryor had been going on for over a year. Most damning of all, a mechanic friend of Calder's examined Rianne's SUV and found evidence of recent front-end damage that had been hastily repaired. But the breakthrough came when Cullen Pryor, facing his own charges as an accessory, decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His statement to investigators was devastating. Rianne said Jace was going to ruin everything, that he was trying to take her son and expose their relationship. She wanted him gone, and she had a plan. According to Cullen, Rianne had sabotaged Jace's brake lines the morning of the accident, then followed him to Steep Creek Road to ensure the job was finished. When the initial sabotage failed to cause a fatal crash, she'd used her SUV to force him over the embankment. She called me after it happened, Cullen admitted. Said we needed to get our story straight before the police arrived. She was calm about it. Cold, like she'd just handled a business problem. The trial of Rianne Gallows began on a snowy morning in January. Calder arrived early, claiming a seat in the front row where she'd have to see him every day. He wanted her to know he wasn't going anywhere until justice was served. District Attorney Catherine Walsh had built her case methodically, each piece of evidence supporting the others like stones in a wall. She opened with a simple statement that cut through the courtroom like a blade. Rianne Gallows is a killer who murdered her husband and tortured her stepson. For months, she fooled this community into believing she was a grieving widow struggling to raise her children alone. But the evidence will show she's actually a calculating predator who destroyed her family for money and the freedom to continue her affair. Walsh's presentation was devastating. She played the audio recordings that documented Rianne's abuse of Micah, each cruel word echoing through the packed courtroom. Gasps and sobs came from the gallery as Rianne's voice filled the space. You stupid brat. I should have let your daddy take you with him off that road. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several jurors looked sick. Others stared at Rianne with open disgust. Cassidy Wild took the stand next, her testimony calm and professional despite the emotional weight of her words. She walked the jury through months of documented injuries, explaining how the pattern and severity indicated systematic abuse. In my 20 years as a school nurse, she said, I've never seen a case this clear-cut. The evidence was overwhelming, but my reports kept disappearing. Someone was protecting the abuser. When Walsh asked who she believed was responsible for the missing reports, defense attorney Davis objected loudly. Judge Morrison sustained the objection, but the implication hung in the courtroom air like smoke. Ronan Kerr testified about Jace's final weeks, his voice breaking as he described his friend's desperation to save his son. He was scared, really scared. He said Rianne had threatened to destroy him if he tried to take Micah away. Did he specify what kind of threats? Walsh asked. She said she'd tell everyone he was molesting the boy, that no one would believe his word against hers. Ronan looked directly at Rianne. He said she was capable of anything. The defense tried to portray Rianne as a victim of circumstance, a young mother overwhelmed by tragedy and struggling with postpartum depression. Davis brought in character witnesses who testified about her community involvement and charitable work. But the audio recordings destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt. You couldn't fake that level of calculated cruelty. You couldn't explain away systematic abuse as a momentary lapse in judgment. On the third day, Calder took the stand. Walsh led him through his investigation step by step, letting him tell the story of uncovering the truth about his brother's death. What convinced you that Jace's accident wasn't accidental? She asked. The brake failure didn't make sense. I'd serviced that car myself a week before the crash. The brakes were perfect. Calder's voice was steady, controlled. But what really convinced me was the GPS data showing Rianne's phone at the crash site before police arrived. How did that make you feel, discovering your sister-in-law had killed your brother? Davis objected before Calder could answer, but the question had served its purpose. The jury was looking at Rianne with undisguised horror. During cross-examination, Davis tried to paint Calder as an obsessed vigilante who'd manufactured evidence to satisfy his need for revenge. But Calder's military background and reputation in the community made him a difficult target. Isn't it true, Mr. Rohn, that you were jealous of your brother's success? His marriage, his family, his business? Calder met Davis's gaze calmly. I love my brother. I loved his son. When I realized they were in danger, I did what was necessary to protect them, even if it meant breaking the law to obtain evidence. Especially then. The courtroom erupted in applause before Judge Morrison could restore order. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Wells, Jace's family doctor, had been subpoenaed by the prosecution despite her initial reluctance to get involved. I treated Micah for numerous injuries over the past year, she testified. Burns, bruises, cuts that were inconsistent with normal childhood accidents. I suspected abuse, but my reports to Child Protective Services never resulted in action. Why do you think that was? Walsh asked. Because someone was making them disappear. Someone with influence in the system. Davis objected furiously, but the damage was done. The jury understood that Rianne's family connections had enabled her crimes. The final piece of evidence was the dashcam footage from Jace's car. The courtroom fell silent as they watched the final moments of his life, the black SUV in the rearview mirror, the desperate fight with failed brakes, his voice crying out in terror. When the video ended, several jurors were crying. Rianne sat stone-faced, but Calder could see her hands shaking. On the fourth day of trial, D.A. Walsh played her trump card. She called Detective Santos to the stand and introduced evidence that no one had seen coming. Detective, did your investigation reveal any additional information about the defendant's newborn daughter? Yes. We conducted DNA testing to establish paternity for insurance purposes. And what did that testing reveal? The baby is not Jace Gallo's biological child. DNA analysis shows Cullen Pryor is the father. The courtroom exploded. Rianne's face went white as jurors stared at her in shock. Even Davis looked stunned. His client had never mentioned this particular detail. Walsh continued relentlessly. So the defendant was having an affair with Mr. Pryor while married to Jace Gallows. That's correct. And she became pregnant with Mr. Pryor's child while still married to the victim. Yes. Did she ever inform her husband that the baby wasn't his? No. In fact, she actively concealed the true paternity from him and from insurance investigators. Walsh introduced hospital records showing Rianne had listed Jace as the father on official documents, defrauding the insurance company in the process. This wasn't just murder, Walsh told the jury during closing arguments. This was a conspiracy to steal a man's life, his money, and his son. Rianne Gallows didn't just kill her husband, she stole his identity as a father and used it to commit fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict in a clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of interference with a government report, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The litany continued through all 12 counts. Guilty on every charge, Judge Morrison set sentencing for the following week. As court officers moved to escort Rianne back to jail, she finally lost control completely. "This is all lies," she screamed, fighting against the handcuffs. "Calder Rohn destroyed my family. He's obsessed with me. He made all of this up." She turned toward the gallery, her face twisted with rage. "You all believe his lies. My husband is dead, and you're letting his killer walk free." Judge Morrison's gavel echoed through the chaos. "Remove the defendant from my courtroom." As they dragged her away, Rianne's voice carried one final threat. "This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll prove what really happened." But her words fell on deaf ears. Justice had been served. At a week later, Judge Morrison sentenced Rianne Gallows to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no emotion as the sentence was read, staring straight ahead like she was already planning her next move. But there would be no next move, no appeals that would stick, no family connections that could overturn a righteous verdict. Calder walked out of the courthouse in a bright winter sunlight, feeling like he could breathe freely for the first time in months. Cassidy Wilde was waiting for him on the steps, holding Micah's hand. "Is it really over?" the boy asked. Calder knelt down to meet his eyes. "It's really over. She can't hurt you anymore." Micah threw his arms around Calder's neck, finally allowing himself to believe he was safe. 6 months later, Calder stood in the doorway of his newly renovated garage, watching Micah organize tools with the same methodical precision his father had shown. The sign above the bay doors read, "Roan and Son Auto," in bold letters that caught the morning sun. Cassidy had officially adopted Micah after a hearing that brought tears to everyone's eyes. But she understood the importance of keeping the boy connected to his father's memory and his uncle's love. Calder picked him up from school every day, teaching him about engines and responsibility in equal measure. "Uncle Calder," Micah looked up from the wrench set he was arranging. "Do you think Dad would be proud of what we did?" "I know he would be, buddy. You were brave when it mattered most." "Will you tell me about him again? About when you were kids?" Calder sat on a workbench and pulled the boy close. "Your dad was stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery. But he had the biggest heart of anyone I ever knew." They talked until the afternoon customers started arriving. Regular folks with honest problems that had honest solutions. Car troubles that could be fixed with time and skill and fair prices. Cullen Pryor had disappeared after his plea deal, leaving town in the middle of the night like the coward he'd always been. Word was he'd found work on an oil rig somewhere up north, where men's past didn't matter as much as their willingness to work dangerous jobs. Rian tried to send letters from prison, manipulative messages designed to make Micah feel guilty for destroying their family. Calder burned each one unopened, letting the ashes scatter in the wind. Some secrets deserve to die. Deputy Tom Gallows had been quietly transferred to a desk job after the trial revealed his role in covering up abuse reports. No criminal charges were filed, but his career in law enforcement was effectively over. The system had failed Micah for months, but in the end, justice found a way that on Sundays, Calder and Micah visited Jace's grave together. They brought fresh flowers and shared stories about school and the garage and plans for the future. Sometimes Micah would talk to the headstone like his father could hear every word. "We caught the bad guys, Dad." Uncle Calder made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. And in the quiet of the cemetery, with the wind moving through the pine trees and the sun warming their faces, it almost felt like Jace was there with them. Some wounds never fully heal. But sometimes, if you're lucky, they scar over clean and strong. The Roan name would continue. The garage would prosper. And a little boy would grow up knowing he was loved and protected and valued. That was justice enough for any man.